Section 9.5, the quadratic formula. All right, here's the section you've been waiting for all semester, the last one. All right, so let's finish this one off, and then we'll get ready for the final, and we'll be all done. All right, so the quadratic formula. This is our last technique for solving quadratic equations. The beauty of the quadratic formula is it works for every situation. Any quadratic equation you have, this method will work. All right, so here's what it says. If ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, a does not equal 0, basically if you have a quadratic equation, but notice we do have to have it set equal to 0, then x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so as I said, the great news is the quadratic formula always works. Bad news is it's probably the most complicated formula you've ever seen in your life up to this point. Now, here's the good news, the other good news. You do not need to memorize this formula, not for this class. I will give you this formula on the final, okay? Next semester, if you go on to Math 1215, you will probably be required to memorize this formula. You'll see it again, you'll use it again. All right, so let's do a couple examples here. How about 3x squared minus 5x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, again, we need to recognize we have a quadratic equation. It's quadratic because we have the x squared. We need to have it set equal to 0, much like we did when we factored. We do have it set equal to 0. We're in great shape. So we pick out our numbers here. A is always the number with the x squared, so a is 3 in this case. B is always the number in front of the x. Now notice up above I have written plus b, but here we have a minus. That's okay. B is the number minus 5. The numbers can be negatives, that's okay. And again up above I have plus c, but here we have a minus 3. That's fine. C is the number minus 3. All right, so all we're going to do is plug these numbers in and work out the arithmetic. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's going to be negative b. Well, b is already negative 5, so negative 5 is going to be a positive 5. Plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared. Now notice I put that negative 5 inside parentheses. That's important because I do have to have negative 5 times negative 5, which is 25. I see a lot of students not put parentheses there, and then they write negative 25, and that's wrong. Put the parentheses around that number right there. It'll help you get the right answer. Minus 4 times 3 times negative 3. And again, notice I'm using parentheses. Helpful to use parentheses. It will help you get the right sign all over 2a. 2 times 3. All right, so now all I need to do is simplify. That's 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 times negative 5 is 25 minus 4 times 3 times negative 3. That's negative 36. But notice I already have a minus here, and I have a minus there. Minus and a minus is going to make that a plus. So that's going to be plus 36 all over 6. That's 5 plus or minus the square root of 61 over 6. And there it is. I'm done. Now, one thing to look for is sometimes the answers will come out nice. Sometimes they won't. What I mean by that is sometimes your square root will be a nice number. And when it is a nice number, you should simplify it and write it down. But here it isn't. So that's fine. We leave it as 5 plus or minus square root of 61 over 6. Had it turned out to be a nice number, we would write it down as a nice number. Let me see if I can find an example like that. All right, so here is our last example of the whole entire semester. Let's say I had 2x squared minus 5x equals 12. I do notice I have a quadratic equation. Quadratic because I have x squared. What I don't have is 0 on one side. Before you can use the quadratic formula, you've got to have 0 on one side. So you've got to expand it all out if needed and get the 0 over there. All right, so again, I pick out my numbers here. A is 2, B is -5, and C is -12. All right, x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. If you write that formula down 3 or 4 or 5 times, you'll probably memorize it by accident. That's why I'm writing it down. Writing it down so you hear it over and over again. All right, once again, -b. b is -5, so negative b is going to be 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared. That's -5 squared minus 4 times a is 2 times c is -12, all divided by 2a. That's 2 times 2. All right, so once again, I do some arithmetic here, simplify this down. That's 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 4 times 2 times -12. Use my calculator there. 4 times 2 times -12 is -96. Again, notice I have a minus sign here and a minus sign there. Minus a minus is going to make that a plus. So I'm going to write it as plus 96 all over 4. So that's 5 plus or minus the square root of 96 plus 25 happens to be 121 over 4. Now, you might not recognize it, but the square root of 121 happens to be a nice number. Square root of 121 happens to be 11. So what I would do now is I would write two answers. X equals 5 plus 11 over 4, or x equals 5 minus 11 over 4. And that's what I meant by when I said if the square root comes out to be a nice number, write it down and simplify it. Let's see, 5 plus 11 is 16. 16 over 4 is 4. So there's one answer, x is 4. And my answer over here, 5 minus 11 is -6. -6 over 4, I can reduce that to -3/2. Okay, so there's the beauty of the quadratic formula. It always works, always. It will work if your a, b, and c are fractions. It will work if your a, b, and c are decimals. They're just a little bit harder to deal with, but it will work, all right? So anytime you have a quadratic equation, there's one of your options. Use the quadratic formula.